Mike hadn't been married long before leaving his wife Sarah to work overseas in the Middle East, forcing Sarah to move in with his father Walter in an aging walk-up near Staten Island's waterfront in New York City. Walter's wife, Mike's mother Eleanor, had passed away over a decade ago. Two lonely souls now shared a roof, as the silent building absorbed every sound. What seemed on the surface like a quiet New York tale actually veiled a haunting tragedy. Mike and Sarah had been married barely 2 months when they had to separate. Life in the city was difficult, and their home was old and worn, and only. Son struggled academically and made a living after marriage doing odd jobs at a large container terminal. Sarah had known hardship since childhood, being the youngest of 4 sisters, wasn't afraid to marry far from home or live with her husband's family. She yearned only for a peaceful, loving life. But financial burdens soon weighed heavily on their dreams. Mike heard from colleagues about working as a foreign laborer in the Middle East. It's promising enough income in just 2 years to rebuild everything. Sarah initially resisted, not wanting to part so soon after marrying, but out of love for Mike and hope for their future, she agreed, praying the 2 years would fly by and they'd be reunited. The morning they saw Mike off at JFK Airport, the air was unusually cold, the sea breeze from New York Harbor cutting sharply. The taxi sped down the highway toward the airport. In the back seat, Sarah leaned on Mike's shoulder, silent for a long time. At the airport, when it was time to part, Mike pulled his suitcase, glanced back at her, eyes glistening but forcing a smile. His voice soft with emotion. It's just 2 years. Once I've saved enough, I'll return. We'll buy a bigger home, bring Dad to live with us, open a diner so you won't have to work so hard. Then we'll have babies, boy or girl. It doesn't matter. Happiness will come. I promise. Sarah softly nodded, embracing him tightly as if capturing his breath. With her head lowered, voice choked, she whispered, I asked Dad to look after you a few days. He's strict, but kind. Listen to him, okay? You'll be fine, won't you? Biting her lip, she quickly kissed his cheek and whispered, I'll be good. Just come back safely. Don't forget me. Mike paused for a long moment before turning and walking swiftly toward security, not daring to look back. Sarah stood motionless until the loudspeaker announced the flight's departure before she turned to leave. The taxi ride back to Staten Island felt colder than before. The wind crept through her collar, chilling her chest. Walter's home was in an old walk-up near the waterfront, built over a decade ago, its paint peeling, cracks covered in moss. On the narrow balcony, several orchid pots and aging plants sat scattered. Since retiring, Walter had lived alone after his wife's passing. His temperament was well-known, taciturn, quick-tempered, and rigid in his routines. Mike once told, her dad's strict but kind-hearted. Struggles to express himself, don't take it personally. When she came as his new daughter-in-law, she was a bit nervous, but seeing that he wasn't overly harsh. She gradually felt at ease, however. From the moment Mike left this small home, suddenly became unnaturally quiet on the day she saw her husband off. Walter opened the door without a smile or asking any questions, just saying one sentence. Come in, put your luggage there and go upstairs to rest for a bit. I'll cook lunch. She nodded slightly, pulled her suitcase into the house and went straight up to the room on the 2nd floor. The room she and Mike had shared since they got married. The room was exactly the same as before the sheets were. The light beige ones, she had changed last week. The pillow still smelled of his familiar shampoo. Everything reminded her of the husband who had been gone for less than half a day. She sat on the bed, staring blankly out the window, then sighed, feeling a strange emptiness. That afternoon, as Walter said, he cooked dinner, simple dishes, watercress soups, scrambled eggs, and some soy sauce chicken wings placed on the old wooden table by the window. She went downstairs. Toei picked up her food and sat across from him, but throughout the meal hadn't said a word, just ate slowly, occasionally nodding when she offered him food. Otherwise remaining complete silent, she tried to initiate conversations a few times, asking if Han needed help on the balcony or if he needed anything from the market, but he only replied briefly, no need, I'll handle it. She ate amidst the clinking of chopsticks on the bowl, clearly hearing the sea wind whistling through the window cracks. After dinner, Walter finished tidying up and told her to rest while he went to the balcony to smoke, his posture hunched looking. Out at the distant Staten Island waterfront, she watched him, feeling a vague sadness for some reason, as if this building was too accustomed to the feeling of losing loved ones in the days that followed. Sarah tried hard to fulfill her duties as a daughter-in-law. She got up early to cook washcloths, clean the rooms, and make tea for him. She carefully remembered her husband's instructions. Don't talk too much, don't ask questions, and do everything gently and properly. But the longer she stayed in this building, the more she felt the atmosphere becoming heavier with each passing day. She began to clearly feel the loneliness seeping into every meal. Every echoing footstep in the hallway between the stairs and the bedrooms. Walter spoke very little, only occasionally giving instructions about locking the door or watering the plants, never asking what she thought or how Chef felt. Everything in the building followed an old-fashioned, punctual, unchanging routine. Every time she passed the living room, she would see him sitting in the same position, in his rattan chair, holding his pipe, staring blankly at the empty, looking as if he was thinking about something very distant. She had once thought perhaps he was sad because he missed his son, but she increasingly felt it was more than that. In those moments, felt like a stranger lost in the ancient shell of a man too accustomed to solitude. She knew she should understand, but she couldn't shake off the feeling of alienation every morning. Waking up in an empty room, adjacent to the closed-off room where she slept, she felt everything around her was both familiar and strange, as if she was living in a world that didn't belong to her, trying in vain to touch true warmth. Perhaps that's why she gradually became more cautious. Every word, every glance, every gesture had to be thought through beforehand. She didn't dare laugh loudly, didn't dare talk too much. Even the sound of opening her room door every night had to be as quiet as possible. As if afraid of waking the silent and rigid order of the place, whenever Mike sent a message asking how she was, she only replied briefly, "I'm fine, Dad. Is the same. Everything is fine." But deep down she knew the feeling that was growing every day was anything but fine. A vague, lost, uneasy feeling, and a sense of being out of place with the gruff old man living in a building burdened by the weight of thepes from the day Mike left. Sarah's life in the building became increasingly pleasant, even suffocating. All activities proceeded according to a cold rhythm, as if arranged. Walter didn't change much, remaining a thin figure, moving silently, speaking curtly, but recently he had started to show more concern for her in an unusual way. At first it was just brief questions like, "Are you enjoying your food?" Or "Are you tired today?" But then Walter gradually started brewing herbal tea for her every day. He said it was a family remedy. Mike's mother used to calm nervous and nourish the blood of newly married women, especially helpful for regulating sleep and reducing stress. Hearing him say this, Sarah didn't doubt too much. On one hand, she felt he was old and kind-hearted, and she should accept. On the other hand, she was having insomnia, so she drank it. At first, she only drank half a cup. Then she drank Ital, as she didn't see anything unusual. But not long after, she began to notice something was wrong. During the day, she often felt tired, her eyes burned, her throat was dry. And sometimes, when she was doing housework, she would feel dizzy and her mind would be muddled, as if covered by a layer of fog. Sometimes while cooking, she would forget what she was doing, standing silently in the kitchen for a few minutes, unable to remember if she had just chopped vegetables or put the pan on the stove. She thought it was because she was tired, that she wasn't used to Mike's absence. But this confusion wasn't like normal weariness. It was as if someone was slowly draining her energy, causing her mind to sink into a semi-conscious state. On the evening of that Friday, the situation became even more pronounced. That night it was colder than usual. Andy's sea wind whistled through the door cracks, howling like a cry. Sarah felt dizzy after dinner. As soon as she lay on the bed without even dozing off, she felt herself falling into a very deep sleep, so deep that no sound could wake her. She didn't dream, nor did she have nightmares. She just felt herself being sucked into a dark, thick space with nowhere to escape. She didn't realize that she had been targeted by Walter. The next morning, when she woke up with a start, sunlight streamed onto the bed. The clock showed it was almost 8 o'clock. She sat up in a panic, feeling her body heavy, as if pressed down by a ton of stones. Her eyes burned in her head, throbbing dully, and her heart pounding because she didn't understand what had just happened. She couldn't remember when she had fallen asleep, or why she had slept from the previous afternoon until morning. She went downstairs, her steps still unsteady, Ass walked into the kitchen. She saw Walter standing there cooking porridge, still wearing his old sweater, still with a slightly hunched posture and the same calm expression as every day seeing her come down. He nodded slightly and asked her in an offhand tone without the slightest surprise, "Did you sleep well, Sarah?" Sarah rubbed her eyes, looking confused as if she hadn't yet woken from a dream. Her voice from just waking up, I slept from afternoon. Until now, I overslept, Dad. I don't understand why I slept so heavily. I've never been like this before, Walter maintained. His calm expression, pouring the porridge, not looking at her, just smiling slightly, and replying in an offhand manner, as if the answer was obvious. "It's just the herbeltia I brewed for you. It soothes the nerves you need. Rest sleeping more. Healthy." Sarah smiled wryly, but felt a little uneasy. She remembered very clearly that she wasn't a heavy sleeper and had never slept so long and so deeply that she lost track of time and space after that strange night of deep sleep and Walter's casual explanation about the herbal tea. Sarah began to genuinely worry about herself, because the symptoms that followed were not just fatigue or insomnia. Her mind became more and more muddled day by day. She often forgot what she had done the morning before, and in the afternoon, she felt confused, as if living in a fog with no escape. One day when she was washing dishes, water suddenly overflowed the sink without her noticing, her hands still moving mechanically in the sink, her thoughts wandering to some unclear place, even to the point of hearing the phone ringing. But taking a few minutes to realize it was her phone, she started writing small notes to remember what to do, but the more she tried to write, the more she found everything getting jumbled. Mike video called her once, seeing his wife's bewildered expression, asked her worriedly, but she just smiled and lied, saying she was tired because of the cold weather and couldn't sleep well. She didn't dare tell the truth because she wasn't sure herself what was happening, but deep down Sarah knew that her clarity was being slowly taken away, gently and subtly, as if Somione was pressing her mind with invisible hands. One morning, when she felt as if she had just woken up after a week of confusion, she decided to stop drinking Walter's herbal tea. She didn't say anything, just quietly picked up the teacup, poured it into the sink, rinsed it clean, and put it back in its place, repeating the action the next day and the day after. A strange thing happened. Her memory started to become clearer. The previous blanks gradually filled in her head, no longer felt heavy. Her eyes wherein is burning, and her reactions became faster again. She could remember small things like where she put her Metro card, when to hang up the laundry, the schedule for watering the plants, things that seemed normal but had been completely blurry before. This feeling was like being pulled out from under a black veil, breathing genuinely clear air, but accompanied by a greater fear. She knew very clearly that there was something in the herbal tea Walter gave, and she knew that he knew it. To that morning when she was cleaning the kitchen, Sarah decided to check all the commonly used condiment jars. She pretended to be casual, opening each ladoni by one. When she opened the white sugar jar, her heart almost stopped. Underneath the sugar was a small transparent plastic bag. Inside were a few partially opened pills on a strip. She took them out gently, wiped away the surrounding sugar, and read the blurred print on the pill strip. Transine, a strong sedative. She had heard about it in a newspaper article in a tabloid newspaper, about cases where women were drugged and lost control of their actions. Her hands trembled, her heart pounded, and her throat was as dry as if she had swallowed sand. All the vaguest suspicions suddenly became clear with a burning sensation. It was no longer a feeling but clear truth. She quickly put it back in its place, pretending she hadn't seen anything. The entire afternoon she couldn't eat, but Walter ate, as usual, without saying a word, only occasionally glancing at her. There was something different in his eyes, but she didn't dare look back. After eating, he called her to the living room, gave her an old wooden box, and it was a keepsake left by Mike's mother, Eleanor, and told her to try on the clothes inside to see if they fit. His voice was still steady, but his eyes were filled with a strange expectation. Sarah opened it. Inside were an old dress, a rusty makeup box, and a wooden comb. The smell of old powder filled her nostrils, almost suffocating her. She had never heard him talk about Mike's mother before, and now he Way-staking everything out and putting it in her hands, telling her to try it on like an offer she couldn't? Refused she forced a smile, trying to regain her composure and skillfully requested permission to take them to her room, to look at them privately. When she closed the room door, her hands dropped her fingers, tittily clutching the edge of the dress as if holding on to a harsh truth she had been afraid to face after standing there motionless for a while. She mustered all her courage, held the dress, looked at herself in the mirror, and tried it on. The soft fabric felt cold like water. As soon as she put it on, she instinctively felt a chill, as if someone was standing behind her, staring intently at her. She turned around, but there was no one there. But at that moment, she understood what Walter was doing. It wasn't just simple care, not just a father-in-law's love for his daughter-in-law, but a substitution, a morbid obsession with the image of his deceased wife, and she was the star wanted to recreate in a younger, fresher form. But with a manipulative Sarah immediately took off the dress, put it back in the box, and tucked it deep into the bottom of the wardrobe. Then she took a deep breath, trying to calm herself down so as not to show any flaws. But that night at dinner, she couldn't hold back any longer. She put down her chopsticks, looked up, her voice trembling but steady enough. "Dad, what kind of medicine are you giving?" Milter, holding his rice bowl, stopped his eyes, looked directly at her. A flicker of light passed, and then disappeared. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly, his voice slow, but with a hint of unease. His face was very slightly pale, but she saw it clearly. "Dad just wants to calm you down. You're always so stressed." At that moment, Sarah could say with certainty that he was hiding something bigger than the pills hidden in the sugar from that brief conversation at dinner that day. Sarah had no more doubts. She was convinced that Walter had done something to her and was deliberately controlling her mind in a subtle way. Even more terrifying was the nervous look in Highsize. When asked about the medication, his way of evading justifying it with calmness like a twisted mask which caused Sarah to lie awake all night. She tossed and turned, eyes closed but not daring to fall into a deep sleep. Every subtle sound outside the hallway made her heart pound. Then around 3 o'clock a.m. amidst the faint sound of the sea breeze and the ticking of the clock, Sarah unconsciously thought of the third floor, the place Walter never allowed her to set foot in when she first came as his daughter-in-law. Mike mentioned that it was his mother's room when she was alive. Since her death, his father had kept the room locked and no one was allowed in. Now in this situation, her intuition told her that the third floor hid something important, a secret that had never been revealed. The next morning, when Walter left the house to play dominoes, she seized the opportunity, took the spare keychain she had obtained from the desk drawer, and went upstairs very quietly. She stopped at every step to listen. Theodore on the third floor was at the end of the hallway. The paint on the wood was peeling in patches. The lock was still intact, but the key worked successfully. After only 3 tries, she took a deep breath and slowly turned the lock. The dry grating sound made her heart tighten as if she had just touched something forbidden. Gently pushing the door open, the room opened, and a blast of cold air immediately hit her. The air was heavy as if it had been closed for a long time. She reached out and flipped the switch. A faint yellow light illuminated a dusty room. The smell of mildew mixed with something musty and unclear. She walked in, her eyes scanning every corner of the room. The furniture was still intact, including a dressing table placed by the window. The mirror surface had become blurry, but it still reflected the image of a person. She edged closer, gently touching the surface of the table. Dust covered her fingertips, but in the center of the table was a photograph neatly placed in a wooden frame. Old and yellowed, in the photo were a younger Walter and a woman standing beside him. His wife Eleanor. Her eyes were kind but blurred by time. What made Sarah tremble was how similar Eleanor's face was to hers, from her eyes and nose to her mouth. They were identical, but there was a strange coincidence. She felt goosebumps trembling as she picked up the photo frame and looked at it carefully. Then her gaze stopped on something. She couldn't help but notice Walter's smile in the photo. Wasn't a normal happy smile, but a four-sided smile, slightly tilted crooked to one side. And strangely, his eyes weren't smiling at all. Instead, they were hollow and unfamiliar, as if the man in the photo didn't know he was smiling or was trying to perform something to force Sarah put down the photo frame, her mind in turmoil, about to turn and leave. But her gaze suddenly stopped on the wall opposite the bed. In a patch of peeling paint where the light didn't reach, She walked closer, took out her phone, turned on the flashlight, and shone it directly on it, almost screaming, because she clearly saw each letter scratched with a sharp object. The handwriting was messy, trembling as if written in a hurried panic. "Don't trust him." The words weren't long, but each word seemed to stab into her mind, trembling. The blood in her body felt like it had frozen. She stepped back, her eyes wide open, her mouth moving silently, feeling a chill slide down her spine. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. She didn't understand why that sentence was in this room, who wrote it, from when, and why there was that warning. But what she was sure of now was that the fear in her heart had exceeded its limit. Everything was slowly piecing together in her mind. Like rewinding a tape, Walter was giving her medicine hidden in the herbal tea, making her wear his wife's old clothes, and he was keeping a room that no one was allowed near. And now there was a message like Aslan's scream from the past, echoing everything, was leading her towards a dark truth, even if she did not. What the whole picture would look like, she clearly understood one thing. If she didn't escape this bizarre game quickly, the next one to be twisted could be herself. She backed away, heading for Theodore, her hands still trembling, her mind filled with hundreds of unanswered questions. But just as she went down each step of the stairs, a new determination formed in her mind. She would find out everything, no matter how cruel the answer, because now she couldn't trust anything Walter had ever said after discovering the strange message. Don't trust him. In Eleanor's room, Sarah's state of mind was no longer normal. She was always in a state of confusion and unease, and constantly troubled by vague images that were unclear whether they were real or fabricated. Every night, despite trying to stay awake, she would fall into restless, exhausted sleep and often have nightmares. She dreamed of being locked in a tiny, cramped studio apartment, with wire mesh covering the window and only a small hole at the top, letting in a faint light. She screamed, cried, pounded on Theodore until her hands bled, but no one answered outside. There was no sound. Off its steps, only a low male voice echoing as if pressing close to her, you're whispering chillingly, "You can't go anywhere. You're mine, always mine." The voice was so familiar that she felt afraid even after waking up. Opening her eyes, it was the real darkness in the room on the second floor. Her heart pounded, sweat covered her forehead. The blanket and pillow were messy, and her mind still echoed with the sounds from the dream. She couldn't remember the details, only that every time she woke from that dream, her body felt sore, as if she'd just been dragged, and there were red marks on her wrists, as if someone had held her tightly. And some nights she would wake up to find herself standing in front of the third-floor door, her hand already on the doorknob. The door was still closed, but her heart almost stopped because she didn't understand why she was there. She couldn't remember him. Didn't know when she had walked up the stairs, and even her mind was blank, as if her memory had been erased. That feeling was no longer vague, but a clear sign that she was being invisibly controlled, as if someone was pulling the strings of her mind. From within, she started keeping a sleep diary, taking photos with her phone every morning. The position of all objects, the blanket, the pillow, and the teacup, to ensure no one was secretly entering her room or moving anything. But the more she tried to control it, the more she felt herself falling into a mental maze, losing direction, and no longer able to distinguish between what was real and what was imagined. One afternoon, when it started to rain, as she was collecting clothes from the balcony, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. Her vision blurred for a few seconds, and her heart beat violently as if being squeezed. She dropped the damp shirt in her hand and collapsed onto the stool. At that moment, she realized she couldn't bear it alone any longer. She had to speak out, had to find someone to help her, even if it was just a glimmer of light from the outside world. So that night, when Walter had already gone upstairs and the building was silent, she secretly went into the room, locked the door, and took out her phone to call Kevin, her high school friend, who was now a lawyer in Midtown Manhattan. The phone rang 3 times before the other end picked up. Kevin's voice was still as quick and decisive as ever. "Hello, Sarah." "Why are you calling so late?" Sarah held the phone, her hand trembling slightly, her voice from being suppressed in her throat for too long. I don't know where to start, but Kevin, I think my father-in-law, Walter, he wants to control him." Kevin was silent for a few seconds, as if trying to understand what she had just heard. Sarah continued to speak the words, pouring out uncontrollably. "I feel like I can no longer control my sleep. I'm sleepwalking. I wake up in some unexplainable place. San, I found medication in the sugar transcene, And there's a sentence in Eleanor's room someone wrote, "Don't trust him." Her voice weakened with each word as if being strangled on the other end of the phone. Kevin's voice was almost a scream. Yahoof, to leave there after the call with Kevin, Sarah felt as if she had grabbed a load-escaping from a raging flood she knew. She couldn't remain silent or fight alone like before. In her heart, an ominous, dark, unspoken premonition became clearer and clearer, like a thick layer off dust being gradually brushed away, revealing a deep crack in the semi-glycolide surface of her husband's home. The next morning, while Walter went tooth track as usual, Sarah seized the opportunity to clean the storeroom behind the house where Mike said all his old things from childhood were kept, and the only place in the house where Walter never cared about her coming and going. The storeroom was full of dust, crisscrossed with spider webs and cardboard boxes stacked high. She carefully pulled down each box, wiped away the dust, and checked the labels. When she pulled down the fourth box, her hand stopped, seeing an old photo album with a dark red velvet cover lying at the bottom of the box without a name or title, only a small rusty unlocked clasp. She easily opened the cover and flipped through each page, feeling her heart almost leap out. They were wedding photos, clearly Mike's wedding photos. But the person standing next to him wasn't hurt. It was another girl with a small face and melancholy eyes standing next to Mike, wearing a plain white dress. Below the photo, a name was scrolled in pen: Mike and Lisa, 2018. Sarah's throat tightened, her hands trembling violently, almost dropping the photo album. She flipped through the photos that followed. They were all wedding photos, candid shots, even photos of them holding hands taken near the Staten Island waterfront. There were photos of Lisa sitting in the bedroom in her wedding dress with empty eyes, and Mike sitting next to her, smiling faintly. His eyes then were different from the eyes he had given her on their wedding day. There was an indescribably strange equality. She stood there dumbfounded for a long time, then quickly put the photobomb into a cloth bag and hid it in the bedroom drawer. That night, she quietly asked Walter at dinner, very subtly and deliberately not mentioning Lisa's name, just pretending to have heard it from a neighbor, "Dad, did Mike know anyone before I heard Agnes downstairs say he had taken wedding photos before Walter was eating?" Then suddenly stopped. His eyes became somber. He put down his chopsticks and the table, looked at her seriously, his voice very tense. "Don't dig up old matters. What's past is past. If you live in this house, don't be curious or talk nonsense. Understand?" Sarah nodded, lowering her head, but her mind was in turmoil. That night she had insomnia. She sent a message to Kevin, sending the photos from the album, and asked Kevin to find someone to check medical records, residential records, and information related to the name Lisa, the woman in the photo. 3 days later, Kevin called back, his voice filled with surprise and tension. "Sarah, I found it. Her full name is Lisa Miller, born in 1994, originally from a working-class neighborhood in Queens. She was registered as temporarily residing at Walter's house from 2018 to 2019, and she disappeared before that. She had a hospitalization record at a local psychiatric hospital. The reason given was anxiety disorder with suicidal tendencies." Kevin hesitated for a moment, then continued, "But I also found an old doctor who used to work there, Dr. Peterson. He's been retired for a long time, but he still remembers Lisa's case. He said her condition wasn't as severe as stated in the medical record, only symptoms of postmarital stress and some slight insomnia, but strangely she was discharged less than a month after being admitted, without a formal medical assessment, and he never saw her again." Sarah was silent, her head waist exploding. Everything was slowly taking shape. Mike had been married to someone else. That person was sent to a psychiatric hospital in a suspicious manner, then disappeared without a trace, and all information was kept confidential. No one in the building mentioned Lisa. There were no wedding photos displayed, no discussion. Everything was as if Lisa had never existed. Sarah hung up the phone, her heart pounding. She sat by the wind, downably, the entire afternoon. Walter's words echoing in her mind, "Don't dig up old matters." But it was this prohibition that made her want to dig deeper, because if there was nothing suspicious, why hide it like this? Then those strange dream-locked images, the whispers "you can't go anywhere," came back, this time clearer, closer to her ear. She started to be afraid, not just of Walter, but also of the secret he and Mike were hiding. Sarah couldn't bear it any longer after discovering the truth about Mike's first wife. "Lisa?" the woman who mysteriously disappeared with a mental health treatment record, and completely hidden by Walter's entire narrative. Heart was burning every strange dream. Every vague whisper, every detail she initially thought was just a coincidence, was now piecing together, and they all pointed to a place. Walter had always forbidden her from approaching the back alley storeroom. It was the only place in the building. He never allowed her to set foot in, even locking the door, saying it was full of old moldy things not worth looking at. But Sarah no longer believed him. She clearly felt that there was something truly hidden under that floor once discovered it would overturn the entire veil of secrecy. So that morning when Walter said he was going to play cards, Sarah waited for him to leave and immediately returned to the living room to sing. The spare key she had secretly taken before she tried it on the storeroom lock, but it wouldn't open. She wasn't surprised because she knew very well he had changed the lock. She had to go to the kitchen, get a cleaver, and then return to the dusty wooden door. Her heart pounded as if it would jump out. Hands trembled both. Fearful and determined, she put the cleaver into the lock and used all her strength to pry it open, the sound of metal grating harshly after. A few violent blows, the lock broke open and fell off. She took a deep breath and gently pushed the door open. A cold, damp air rushed out as if rising from underground. At that moment, she imagined someone had just breathed on her face. She took a step back, but then regained her composure, turned on the flashlight on her phone, and walked in the storeroom space. It was dark, damp, the smell of mold mixed with a fishy odor, creating a nauseating combination that made her want to vomit. She covered her nose and shone the light around. The walls were peeling, covered in mold. The floor was rough, the dust was thick. So thick you couldn't even see old footprints clearly. But as she shone the light towards the corner of the room, her gaze immediately stopped on a black stain on the cement floor, about half a meter long. Like a patch of dried blood, she walked closer. Her heart pounding, bent down and reached out to touch it gently. A layer of dust fell off, revealing a brown-red stain soaked into the floor. Sarah touched it, feeling it was rough and chilling. She shone the light on the surrounding walls, and suddenly saw a small crack between two bricks. Instinctively, she put her hand into the crack and pulled gently, and suddenly, an entire brick came loose. She pulled the brick out with all her strength, dust flying everywhere, and inside was a small, very hidden wall compartment. Someone had bricked it up, but not tightly enough to completely cover it. Inside the compartment was an old wooden box, a booth the size of a notebook with the lid closed, but not locked. She shone the light around to make sure no one was watching, then took out the box, and with trembling hands opened the lid. There wasn't much inside, only a slightly faded silver necklace with a circular pin engraved with a small blurred line, Lisa and Mike. Just that was enough to make Sarah feel cold all over. She clutched the necklace tightly, holding it close to the light to look at it carefully, and was convinced that these were Lisa's personal belongings, the woman from the wedding photo album, the woman who was once Mike's wife and was now never mentioned by anyone. Underneath the necklace were some small folded pieces of paper. The paper yellowed as if preserved for a long time. She gently unfolded each piece of paper, and inside were messy lines, hurried handwriting, trembling letters, ink smudged in places but still legible. "I'm locked in here. I'm not crazy. No, he's drugging me. He's keeping me because I know this secret. Someone has to believe me." Sarah read each word, feeling every sentence stab into her mind. Frantic and chilling, she had no more doubts. What was happening in this building wasn't just simple control, but a complete hidden tragedy. A woman who's lived in this house was imprisoned, like a prisoner, forced to endure the reputation of being mad, and now no one remembered her anymore. But what made Sarah choke up was not just those pieces of soft paper, but the signature below each one, just Lisa, incomplete, unnecessary bays. She already knew who the author was, holding the old diary pages and the necklace engraved with Lisa's name in her hands. Sarah's heart was in turmoil, her mind occupied by hundreds of unanswered questions. The scrolled words, like a cry for help from hell, still echoed in her mind. "I'm imprisoned. I'm not crazy. He's drugging me." And now Sheck knew very well who the author was. Mike's first wife, the woman who was hidden, peshed into oblivion by a sophisticated web of deceit. She couldn't remain silent any longer. She needed To know the whole truth, even if she had to confront the person who was trying to hide it that afternoon. When Walter returned from Thetrek, placed a copy of a local newspaper on the table, and went to wash his hands in the bathroom, Sarah walked straight into the bathroom, her face showing her determination without disguise, her voice steady, but still calm. "Dad, I want to ask you something, Andy. Hope you'll tell me the truth. Who is Lisa?" The sound of running water. Wastel's steady, but Walter's hands paused for a few seconds halfway through washing. He turned his head to look at her, his eyes calm with a hint of coldness. He didn't answer immediate Lizolt, as if wanting to swallow a stone stuck in his throat. Then he suddenly slammed the edge of the sink. Water splashed everywhere, his voice tense, echoing throughout the room. "You are not allowed to mention that name in this house." Sarah took half a step back in surprise, but then she stood her ground and looked him directly in the eye. "What are you hiding, Lisa? Was Mike's wife wasn't she? Where is she? Why does no one talk about her? Why is there a note in the storeroom that says I'm imprisoned?" Walter spun around violently, his face no longer calm as he thought been. It was contorted, half red, half pale. His eyes suddenly bulging, twitching slightly as if trying to suppress something very big that was about to erupt. He walked towards her quickly, his voice squeezed through his teeth so low that she could barely hear it. "You've been eavesdropping? You've been searching everywhere? You went down to the storeroom alone, didn't you?" Sarah didn't answer, but her eyes were her confirmation. Walter almost screamed, "I told you, if you live in this house, you have to follow the rules. No one is allowed to mention the past. No one is allowed to pry. Lisa has nothing to do with you, and she..." He choked, his eyes bloodshot as if being strangled by Mary's. He didn't dare face Sarah. Still didn't stop. She took a step forward, took out a crumpled piece of paper that read, "I'm not crazy," and held it directly in front of him. "Then who wrote this? Who was imprisoned in that storeroom? Is there a necklace engraved with her name and Mike's name?" Walter looked at the paper, then turned away as if he had just been slapped, not saying a word, just walking silently into the room and slamming the door shut forcefully with a thunderous sound, like a gate being buried. Sarah stood outside, her heart pounding, but she knew she had hit a raw nerve that night. The atmosphere in the building was heavy. She went to the storeroom door and saw that the lock had been replaced with a new one, a big iron lock, much heavier than the old one. She quietly returned to her room, but when she opened the wardrobe to get her phone, she found that the phone was also gone. She frantically searched in every drawer, under the pillow, in her handbag, but couldn't find it. All the information, evidence, and contact with Kevin all gone. The next morning, she tried to open the front door to go buy something, but the door was locked from the outside. The lock was brand new, not one she had seen before. She felt her heart being squeezed. Walter hadn't said anything, but he was gradually regaining control of everything, every item, every corner off the building. She knew she had discovered too much, and he had started to act. "It had been 3 days since Kevin and Sarah completely lost contact. None of her messages were replied to. None of her calls could connect, although the two had been exchanging messages regularly. Every night, even if only short sentences. Kevin had always believed that Sarah could still manage the situation in the building. But now 3 days without any news made him feel extremely anxious. All the worst-case scenarios flashed through his mind. From Sarah being discovered and locked up by Walter, to her phone, buy-in confiscated, or even disappearing like Lisa, he couldn't wait any longer. Early that morning, Kevin packed his things, brought his phone, a voice recorder, and a copy of Lisa's medical records, hired a taxi from Midtown, and rushed straight back to Sarah's house on Staten Island, not daring to think for a second, because the more he thought, the more he felt that something very abnormal was secretly happening in this building. When he arrived at the edge of the Staten Island waterfront, he dismissed taxi and immediately walked along a small path leading to the back of Walter's building. Only those who had lived nearby for a long time knew this path, which bypassed the front door, in which must now be locked tight. As Sarah had said, Kevin spent a few hours observing the situation around the house. Only when he saw Walter come out of the alley wearing a raincoat and carrying a large bag that looked like he was going to the distant track or 2 play cards did he dare to approach the house, gently tapping the back alley wall 3 times, the signal they had agreed upon beforehand. There was no response from inside. He knocked a second time, longer at his time, and then he whispered, "Sarah? It's me. Kevin is here, eh?" A few seconds later, there was the very faint sound of a door latch being opened. Sarah's fearful eyes peeked out from the crack in the door, her face haggarded, lips dry and cracked eyes sunken in dark circles. Under her eyes like someone who hadn't slept well for a week, but when she saw Kevin, she almost screamed quickly. Pulling her friend in and immediately locking the door, Sarah trembled and whispered, "I thought I would never see you again. He took. My phone locked the doors, forbade me from leaving the house. I'm truly locked up, Kevin." Kevin hugged her tightly, holding her forcefully, and he could hear Sarah's heart pounding in her chest. "It's okay, no. I'm here this time. I won't leave you," they sat heavily in the kitchen, trying to keep their voices down, but their eyes were filled with 1,000 words. Sarah quickly recounted everything that had happened over the past 3 days, from Walter suddenly changing the front door and storeroom locks to searching hair room and taking her phone, and even forcing her to sit in the living room under his supervision, appearing like a shadow behind her anytime she left his sight with no privacy left. After listening to all of this, Kevin took out the copy of Lisa's medical records from his bag and pointed to the section with deleted note. This part originally clearly stated that the family requested her admission for observation. And who was that family member? It was Walter had sent Lisa to the psychiatric hospital. This hospital was involved in a document forgery scandal last year, and the timing coincides exactly with Lisa's disappearance. Sarah was silent, her hands trembling. She took out the wooden box she had carefully hidden behind the stove and showed Kevin the piece of paper with the scrolled writing, "I'm not crazy. I'm imprisoned." Kevin read it quickly, then clasped her hand, his voice cold enough. "This time we must act. We can't wait any longer," they planned together, the first step being to approach the people living around Walter's building, those who had seen and heard but had been silent for many years. That afternoon, they both dressed in shabby clothes, pretending to be relatives from out of town visiting. They started asking around in the vicinity. They went to Martha's herbal tea shop, an old neighbor living on the waterfront drive. Sarah braced herself and walked in first, with Kevin following closely. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Martha recognized da 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 da. The shop, when she heard Sarah say she was investigating the story of Lisa, Mike's former wife, Martha paused slightly, her eyes looking into the distance, as if brushing away a very thick layer of dust from the years. She sighed softly, handed Sarah and Kevin a cup of herbal tea each, and then slowly spoke, "I know about this, but no one has ever dared to speak of it. Back then, I was still working down on the waterfront, and often saw Walter and Mike, and also that girl named Lisa. Lisa was always very silent, as if she had something on her mind. One night I saw Walter dragging Lisa and forcing her into a black van. The sky was darkened. I couldn't see Lisa's face clearly, but she kept struggling as if she was being pulled violently. Her mouth seemed to be covered so she couldn't scream, only soft whimpers, and then she disappeared into the van.
Ass.
After that night, I never saw her again." She was silent for a few seconds, then lowered her head, her hands trembling, holding the teacup. "I know I should. I've called the police, but my husband at that time stopped me. He said not to get involved in other people's affairs. Later we moved away and didn't dare to live nearby anymore." Martha's words were like a slap across the face of the neighborhood, which had been silent for so many years. A buried truth was now clearly surfacing. Kevin silently recorded, then held Sarah's hand. His eyes looked at her forehand, full of determination, knowing that the next step would be irreversible. That night, an unexpected drenchel. Rain poured down as if the heavens wanted to end everything with a storm. The wind outside howled, tearing at the old window frames of the building, and the rain beat against the windows. The building shook with every gust of wind, but the situation inside was 100 times more chaotic than outside, because when Walter returned, his raincoat was soaked. His face was pallid from the cold rain, but his eyes were red with rage when he saw a pair of unfamiliar slippers at the entrance. He froze at The door for a few seconds, his voice echoed the heavy air.
Yes.
Who's in my house, Sarah? And Kevin. We're in Thekachan, having just finished packing all the documents and recordings, and were startled to hear the door being slammed open. They looked at each other, knowing they had been discovered. Sarah pushed Kevin behind the cupboard in the corner off the kitchen while she walked out, pretending to be calm. Dad, you're back? Walter looked at Sarah, his gaze sweeping over every corner of the building, high size. Stopping at Kevin's shoes, then stopping at the dining table where 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks were. Still steaming, he walked slowly, picked up the cleaver from the draining rack, his voice low. Who was here? Who ate with you? Sarah tried to lie. I was just eating alone. I was hungry, so I set 2 sets of bowls and chopsticks to have some atmosphere. Walter laughed dryly. The laughter was distorted like Sumana hoving. A fit, then he roared. You're lying to me. You brought someone here. You brought outsiders into my house to dig up old matters, didn't you? Just then Kevin accidentally kicked a tin can behind the wall, causing it to fall and make a loud noise, causing the air to freeze. Walter quickly turned around and ran towards the source of the sound, violently pushing open the flimsy cupboard door. Seeing Kevin standing there trembling before he could react, he swung the cleaver and shouted, "You're all snakes. You want to kill me, don't you?" The cleaver grazed Kevin's arm. A long red wound appeared on his upper arm and blood seeped out, soaking his clothes. Kevin cried out in pain and recoiled, but Walter charged at him like he wasp-possessed. Sarah, in a panic, rushed forward, no longer thinking. She used all her strength to push Walter towards the narrow hallway, bumping him against the wall cluttered with miscellaneous items. He stumbled, but still swung the cleaver wildly. She dodged, pushed him into the room at the end of the hallway, and then suddenly kicked the door shut, locking it from the outside. Walter's voice roared inside like a wild beast trapped in a cage. Sarah, you betrayed me. I raised you. I was so good to you. Why did you betray me? Sarah stepped back, her hands trembling because the old lock wasn't fully engaged due to age. But finally, the door clicked shut, and she gasped. Kevin sat heavily on the floor, clutching his bleeding arm. Sarah quickly grabbed a clean towel and swiftly bandaged the wound. Her eyes filled with tears, but her lips were tightly sealed. She took out Kevin's phone, the only one Walter hadn't found, and tremblingly dialed 911. But her mind was too chaotic. She had to read each digit over and over again when the other unconnected shoe whispered in the rain, "Please come to a certain building on the waterfront drive on Staten Island. Someone is mental unstable and attacking people with a knife. Please, hurry." Just a few minutes later, the sound of police sirens echoed in the rain like a signal of life. But inside a building, the sound of pounding on the door still resonated. Walter was still shouting, "I won't let you ruin my life. She's mine." Her eyes, her smile there, so much like her. When the police broke down the door, Walter was huddled in the corner of the room, his hair disheveled, his face splattered with Rhina's eyes. Wild, his mouth still muttering over and over again, "I just wanted to protect. All off this, I just wanted her to stay with me, accompany me for a few more years." The police officer's flashlight shone directly on his face, causing his entire face to contort when he was handcuffed. He didn't resist, just looked at Sarah and asked, in a voice like a child who had lost his mother, "Sarah, will you stay with me? Don't go anywhere, Eleanor." Eleanor used to say that to Sarah. Didn't answer. Her eyes cold with pain, but her heart was like a storm. She stepped forward to face him, her voice coming through clenched teeth. "You weren't loving, you were destroying. How many people have you destroyed? Don't you even know?" Walter stepped back, trembling, his eyes completely broken. Those words were like the final knife cutting through the illusion he had desperately held on to. When he was put into the police car, he no longer shouted, just muttered, Eleanor, forgive me." Sarah stood at the doorway watching her cheeks wet, unclear if it was rain or tears, but her eyes now were no longer those of a weak victim, but of someone who had just survived hell. She turned to help Kevin up, and the two sat heavily in the simple living room in the middle of the building. The house was complete liquid now, but that quietness wasn't because peace had returned, but because the terrible truth had been uncovered, and they knew this story was far from over. In the following days, the atmosphere at the precinct was as if an invisible blood stain had tainted everything normal in the narrow interrogation room, with only a slowly rotating ceiling fan and a dim incandescent lamp shining on the cold stainless steel table. Walter was silent for a long time, his eyes clouded, his char hanging like dry grass in front of him. Two police officers waited for him to speak. But only when Sarah walked in and sat across from him dead, he slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting hers, as if seeing the entire past he had tried to bury in that building. For over 10 years, he sighed, placed his thin, pale hands on the table, and slowly began to speak, as if reading some horrifying Marys. I used to have a wife named Eliner. We lived peacefully. Then until one day I suspected she was having an affair with her colleague. She started becoming independent, learning to enjoy life, which made me panic. Sarah clenched her fists, tight-listing silently. Walter continued, his voice as if gradually. Losing control, I couldn't stand the thought of being betrayed. Followed her check, her phone asked around everywhere. And then one day we had a fight and she said something I couldn't bear. She said I was old, boring, unable to satisfy her needs, she said. She was leaving me. I went crazy. I pushed her, just a gentle push, but she slipped and fell down the steep stairs of the building, her head hitting the concrete steps. Blood, lots of blood. Hep housed his eyes wide as if he could still see the scene then. Whispered people thought it was an accident. I didn't tell the truth. I kept silent. After some time, Mike brought Lissa home. That girl had the same eyes as Eleanor, just as stubborn, just as asking questions that made me uncomfortable. But at first I thought it was just a coincidence until she found old documents. His voice trembled. She asked me about Eleanor, asking why the timeline on Theda's certificate didn't match. I knew I couldn't let her turn everything upside down, so. The sedativitron scene in her herbal tea, her soup, she started sleeping more, her mind Beckham. Confused, I locked her in the back alley storeroom where Eleanor used to stack miscellaneous things or hang laundry. Kevin stood behind the one-way mirror, his fists clenched until his knuckles turned white. Sarah lowered her head, her throat tight, as if someone was strangling her. Walter continued his confession. At first, I still gave her enough food and water, but she kept screaming, pounding on the door, threatening to call the police. I was so scared, so I locked the door even tighter. Didn't give her any more food. I thought it would only be for a few days, but then she became weaker and weaker and stopped ticking. When I opened the door, she wasn't moving anymore. A deathly silence spread. The police officer recording the confession remained silent. Walter Laffadry, I panicked. Took her body, wrapped her up, and dug a pit in the cement ground in the back alley, right in the corner. It's always damp and dark. They're hard to be discovered. I buried her there since then. Every time I see that corner, I don't dare go near it anymore. Sarah screamed, "You're a monster. What did you think you were loving?" That was a love in love. That was pathology. That was murder. Walter fell silent, just closing his eyes, neither resisting nor defending himself. It was as if at this moment all his strength had been exhausted by the past that afternoon. Under Walter's guidance and referencing records, the police, accompanied by a forensic team, arrived at the building. Sarah and Kevin stood in the distance, watching everyone digging in the corner of the back alley. Sarah felt a chilling sensation, as if she was watching her entire life through someone else's lens. Every shovel of dirt dug up was a piece of buried truth, until a police officer shouted, "I found skeletal remains." Everyone stopped. A small, rusty iron box was dug up from the deep pit. When it was opened, inside were a few small bones, a faded silver bracelet, and a small crumpled piece of paper. The trembling handwriting was still legible. "My name is Lisa Miller. I'm not crazy. I was tricked into coming here." Sarah stood there numbly. The wind blew, messing up her hair, but she didn't feel anything. A tear rolled down her cheek, but she didn't sob, because what her heart carried now wasn't pain but a chilling sorrow. A truth was confirmed. Apperson had lived, loved, struggled against evil, but was buried under concrete, buried in the silence of a small city resident. And now, though late Lisa was finally brought into the light, the crime that was thought to be perfect was finally exposed. But in Sarah's heart, one thing was clear. This story was not over, because everything Walter had just confessed still lacked the final piece of the puzzle. A piece she suspected was related to Mike, and the remaining truth was waiting for her to continue the search. After the case concluded, the dilapidated 3-story building was cordoned off, surrounded by yellow police tape like a rope tightly binding all thousands that had silently lurked within. Sarah stood in the distance, watching, her heart no longer filled with fear or resentment, only one thing keeping her strong: awakening. She was no longer a Thedamid woman, forcing herself to live each day in a toxic home. She was no longer the wife who waited for her husband with Tears in her eyes, no longer the daughter-in-law who hid from watchful eyes. Now she was a survivor, a witness, someone speaking up for the souls buried underground. She returned to Midtown with Kevin. They started a charity organization called Metro Haven, a place welcoming women in the city who had suffered mental abuse, imprisonment, control, and seemingly peaceful familia sand. Had been silent for too long in their cramped office in a rented studio apartment. There was only a table, a few chairs, and a large sign that read, "I believe you. I'm here to support you." Sarah and Kevin met with women who came knocking on their door every day. They told similar stories, husbands locking them in rooms, fathers-in-law drugging their herbal tea, mothers-in-law manipulating them, and some women who had become shadows of themselves out of fear, because they had loved the wrong person, because society told them to endure. Sarah listened to everything without interrupting, without judging, just listening, because I'd once been one of them. She knew that just having someone believe them could give them an encourage to step out of the darkness. Not long after, the media started noticing her story. Newspapers like the Post-Anthem Times reported on the case that happened on Staten Island. Some TV stations invited her on to talk shows, and reporters came to the office asking for interviews. Then an article titled, "I Survived Hell, the story of an NYC woman." Breaking the silence appeared online. Her photo was taken in dim light, her face delicate but her eyes filled with trauma. The article was quickly shared tens of thousands of times, causing a huge reaction in the city. Sarah didn't want fame, but she knew this was an opportunity to make more people dare to speak out. That night, as she and Kevin returned to their cramped studio apartment in Queens after a group counseling session, sitting by a small window of their rented place, sipping iced tea, her phone vibrated. A strange message appeared with no sender name, only one line: "I wasn't alone. B." She froze, not blinking, and then another line immediately appeared. Liz knew this, but she didn't dare speak. The phone number was strangely blocked, showing no area code. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling, and pressed the redial button, but the other end hung up immediately, the screen only showing that the number didn't exist. Kevin walked behind her and asked softly, "Who was it?" Sarah looked at the screen, then slowly turned around, her voice slow but certain. "It was Mike." Kevin frowned. "Your husband? But you said he didn't know anything." Sarah clutched the phone in her hand, her eyes darkening. "I used to think that, but now I'm not so sure." They were silent. The sea wind from the New York harbor blew fiercely through the window cracks, causing the simple curtains to flutter as if someone was standing outside or listening. Kevin whispered, "We have to re-examine all the records, history, Lisa's life, and look for any gaps during Mike's time in the Middle East." Sarah nodded, a new emotion rising in her heart. Not fear, but a deep vigilance, as if that person she had once loved and trusted was also becoming part of the dark. Picture, she thought, was complete. She thought of Walter's eyes when he was handcuffed. Eyes that didn't blame Mike. He hadn't mentioned his son in any of his confessions, as if he was holding back the last part of the truth. For whom the next morning, Sarah walked out of the building in Queens, a scarf fluttering gently in the wind from the New York harbor. Sunlight shone on her face, no longer the dimness of old, but the radiance of someone who had been through everything and still stood strong. She looked up at the sky, her eyes clear, a voice echoing in her mind. This war had just begun, and this time she wasn't alone. In the following weeks, Kevin and Sarah delved into every minute detail of the truth. Like to experience actistis, they carefully examined Mike's communication records and bank statements during his time working in the Middle East, as well as his correspondence with Walter, trying to find any clues. However, Mike seemed to have acted very cautiously, leaving almost no direct evidence. All clues pointed to Walter, who seemed to have taken all the blame alone. Just as Sarah and Kevin were feeling at a loss, a new lead surfaced. Kevin contacted a close friend of Lisa from when she was alive. This friend revealed to them that Lisa had secretly told her that Mike had been addicted to gambling before their marriage and had incurred hug debts. Lisa was always very worried that Mike's gambling addiction would ruin their lives. The friend said she tried to persuade him to quit gambling, but Mike wouldn't listen at all. Not long after they got married, Mike started becoming seasonally irascible and often lost his temper at Lisa over small things. I knew Lisa was very unhappy in the marriage. Sarah and Kevin immediately realized that this lead might be the key to unlocking the mystery. They'd immediately contacted investigators from a special unit and reported Mike's suspected involvement in gambling fraud. Investigators immediately launched an investigation and quickly discovered that Mike had indeed accumulated huge gambling debts before his marriage and had squandered Lisa's dowry not long after in order to repay his gambling debts. Mike even colluded with the casino to set a trap for Lisa and swindle money from her parents. Even more shocking, the investigators also found that Mike and Walter had met with an unidentified man multiple times. This man was likely the casino owner. Investigators suspected that there might have been some unspeakable transaction between Mike Walter and the casino. After gathering sufficient evidence, the special unit immediately launched an operation to arrest Mike. When investigators found Mike, he was gambling heavily in a casino in the Middle East. Faced with irrefutable evidence, Mike finally broke down and confessed to his involvement in the persecution and imprisonment of Lisa, but he still insisted that he had not killed Lisa. "I admit that I wronged Lisa. I did many excessive things to her," Mike cried, "but I truly didn't kill her. It was her who couldn't cope and chose to commit suicide." However, investigators did not believe Mike's defense. They gathered more and more evidence proving that Mike was the real murderer of Lisa. It turned out that in order to completely get rid of Lisa and cover up Walter's crime, Mike had single-handedly orchestrated the persecution of Lisa, imprisoning her and ultimately leading to her death. In order to conceal the truth, Mike even went so far as to implicate his own father. Ultimately, Mike was sentenced to death and Walter was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder. Justice was finally served and Lisa's grievances were finally redressed. After everything had settled, Sarah and Kevin stood in front of the dilapidated 3-story building where Lisa had once lived. The building had been completely demolished, leaving only a pile of ruins. "Do you think all of this is over?" Kevin asked, his voice carrying a hint of weariness. Sarah shook her head, gently touching the scar on her arm left from defending against the cleaver. "Perhaps for Lisa it's over, but for us the battle has just begun. There are still too many women living in fear and silence, and we must speak out for them. Help them step out of the darkness." They returned to Metro Haven, where they continued to provide assistance to women who had suffered mental abuse and control. Their story spread throughout the world, inspiring more people to stand up and bravely face the darkness. Sarah knew that Lisa's story would forever inspire her, reminding her not to give up hope, not to stop fighting, because only when all the lanterns are lit will the darkness finally be dispelled. Years later, Mike died in prison. During his sentence, before his death, he wrote a letter of confession to Sarah, confessing everything he had done. In the letter, Mike admitted that he bore undeniably responsible for Lisa's death and stated that he had been tormented by guilt. He begged for Sarah's forgiveness and hoped that she could forget him and start her life anew. After reading Mike's letter, Sarah had mixed feelings in her heart. There was both hatred and pity. She hated Mike's cruelty and selfishness, and at the same time Pietta's weakness and helplessness. Ultimately, Sarah chose to forgive Mike and decided to let go of the past and start her life anew. Sarah continued to operate Metro Haven, helping more women in the city overcome difficulties. She became a prominent figure in the city, and her story touched countless people. On a bright sunny afternoon, Sarah came to the Staten Island waterfront. She stood by the sea looking at the distant horizon, her heart filled with emotion. She thought of Lisa, thought of Walter, thought of Mike, thought of everything from the past. She took a deep breath, as if to inhale all the sorrow into her lungs. Then she slowly exhaled. As if to release all the pain, Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the sea breeze brush against her cheeks. She knew that the past could not be changed, but she could create a beautiful future. She opened her eyes, which were filled with hope and determination. She believed that with love and courage they could overcome all difficulties and create a beautiful life. Sarah turned and left the Staten Island waterfront, her steps firm and strong. She knew that her path was still long, but she would not shrink. Baksha would continue to fight for the rights of women in the city until the last moment of her life. Years later, Metro Haven became one of the most well-known charitable organizations in New York. helping tens of thousands of women overcome difficulties. Sarah also became a legendary figure in the city, and her name was Forever Bird. Sarah's story tells us that even when in darkness, we must bravel a purse light with love and courage. We can overcome all difficulties and create a beautiful life.